At 6:03 a.m., I heard plastic scrape across concrete again, slow and deliberate, like someone wanted me awake. I looked through the blinds and saw her, the HOA Karen, standing in my driveway, hands on my trash can, eyes darting like she owned the place. This wasn't an accident. This was the 5th time that week. Every pickup day, my bin ended up tipped over, garbage spread like a warning. Complaints went nowhere. Cameras. She knew the angles. Fines. Somehow they landed on me. That morning, something snapped, and I decided if she wanted to play games, I'd set the board. I'm not a confrontational person. I followed rules, paid dues, smiled at meetings. She did the opposite. She prowled the street with a clipboard and a grin, enforcing imaginary bylaws. Parked 2 inches wrong? Note. Lid not fully closed. Photo. Trash can out 15 minutes early? Knocked over, for safety. Everyone knew it was her, but proof evaporated. HOA politics are a maze designed to exhaust you. So I started documenting. I logged dates, times, weather. I tested theories. Wind. No. Animals. No. Gravity. Definitely not. Patterns emerged. She struck when the street was quiet, when cameras faced away, when plausible deniability could breathe. The bin fell toward my driveway, never the road. Intent leaves fingerprints if you're patient. That's when the idea formed, simple, legal, and invisible. Not a booby trap. Not damage. Just accountability. I upgraded my setup the way homeowners do when pushed too far. I repositioned lights. I adjusted angles. I added one thing she wouldn't see coming because she assumed I wouldn't dare. HOA Karens thrive on that assumption. The night before pickup, I set everything and went to bed with the calm of someone who finally has leverage. I didn't want revenge. I wanted truth. I wanted a clean record that even the board couldn't ignore. At 6:01 a.m., motion alerts chimed. I watched, heart steady, as a familiar silhouette approached. What happened next didn't just stop the trash can tipping. It unraveled a routine she'd relied on for years, exposed a pattern, and forced a reckoning that changed how our street dealt with power. If you've ever felt targeted by someone hiding behind rules, this is where it turns. I knew the risk, because escalation invites scrutiny, and scrutiny cuts both ways. Still, fairness matters. Neighborhoods survive on trust, and bullies rot it quietly. My plan didn't hurt anyone, break rules, or bend ethics. It simply captured reality, clean and undeniable. By sunrise, I understood the footage would speak louder than arguments, louder than complaints, and louder than her confidence ever could. That certainty steadied my hands as dawn crept closer, quietly forward. The footage began at 5:58 a.m., quiet enough to hear the distant hum of a freeway. My driveway sat still under the new porch light, trash can upright, lid closed. Then she appeared from the sidewalk, hoodie up, moving with the confidence of someone who had done this many times before. She glanced left, then right, pausing just outside the beam of light like she understood shadows better than most. That was my first confirmation, this was never random. She stepped closer, testing the space. What she didn't realize was that the light angle I'd adjusted erased her favorite blind spot. The camera wasn't new, it was repositioned. And the addition, small, silent, and legal, caught everything in clean detail. No blur. No doubt. She placed her hands on the trash can rim and tipped it carefully, controlling the fall so it looked accidental. The lid popped open. A bag slid out. She stepped back, nodded to herself, and walked away. I sat at my kitchen table replaying the clip, not angry, focused. The timestamp, her face, the motion. All there. I clipped the video, saved the original, and backed it up twice. HOA disputes die in gray areas. I had color, sound, and sequence. Before sunrise, another alert chimed. She returned. This time she circled the can, noticed it hadn't spilled enough, and nudged a bag with her shoe. That small moment mattered. It showed intent beyond tipping. She looked straight toward my house, smirked, and left. The smirk felt like a dare. I resisted the urge to confront her immediately. Timing is leverage. At 8:30 a.m., the HOA email hit my inbox. Subject line, trash compliance issue, immediate attention. Attached were photos of my tipped can, sent from an anonymous board member. I replied politely, attached my clip, and asked for a meeting. No accusations. Just facts. Silence followed. By noon, neighbors started texting. Did you see the email? What's going on? Apparently, she'd CC'd half the street, framing it as a safety hazard. I forwarded the footage to the board and requested it be shared in full context. 15 minutes later, the HOA president called. His tone had changed. Measured. Careful. We scheduled an emergency meeting for that evening. I printed stills, timestamps highlighted. I brought a USB with originals. She arrived late, sat stiff, and avoided eye contact. When the video played, the room shifted. No one spoke. The smirk froze on screen like a confession. I didn't say a word until the president asked if I had anything to add. I simply said, I want this to stop. That's when she exploded. She slammed her folder shut and stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor. This is harassment, she said, pointing at the screen like the evidence had insulted her. He set me up. The room stayed quiet. The video didn't argue back. It just looped her hands, the tip, the nudge, the look toward my house. Facts have a way of draining theatrics from a room. The HOA president cleared his throat and asked her to sit. She didn't. She paced. She claimed the trash can was already unstable. She suggested the wind. Someone mentioned the second clip, where she returned to push a bag loose. That's when her story fractured. She said she was fixing a hazard. The board asked why that hazard existed only at my address. I finally spoke. Calm. I've logged 5 incidents in 10 days. Same time window. Same direction of fall. I asked for help. I got warnings instead. I slid the printed stills across the table, timestamps circled, angles marked. The addition I'd installed wasn't flashy, it was compliance grade, approved by city code. No rules broken. No privacy violated. Just a better view of my own driveway. A neighbor raised a hand and admitted her can had been tipped too once. Another said they'd been fined for lids. A pattern emerged, and it wasn't about safety. It was control. The president paused the video and asked her, gently, to explain the smirk. She laughed, too loud, then stopped when no one joined. The board voted to table fines pending investigation. That alone felt like a win. But the meeting wasn't done. She accused me of intimidation, of escalating a neighborly issue. I responded with something I'd rehearsed: escalation is when rules become weapons. Documentation is defense. Heads nodded. Someone took notes. She stormed out before the vote concluded. The door rattled. The room exhaled. The president apologized for the fines, for the emails, for the delay. He asked if I'd accept mediation. I agreed, because winning isn't the same as resolving. Outside, dusk settled. I checked my phone and saw a new HOA notice posted to the portal, a reminder about respectful conduct and unauthorized enforcement. That night, I moved the trash can back to its usual spot. No locks. No signs. Just normalcy. At 5:59 a.m., the driveway stayed still. At 6:03, a shadow crossed the sidewalk but didn't stop. By noon, a message arrived from the board: investigation ongoing, enforcement suspended, further updates soon. I knew then the trap wasn't the camera or the light. It was patience. Letting behavior repeat until it indicts itself. And once that door opens, it doesn't close quietly. The next morning, the street felt different, lighter, almost cautious. Word of the HOA meeting had spread quietly, whispers along driveways and morning jogs. I left my trash can in its usual spot, lid closed, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. She was still out there, and she knew I had leverage now. The balance had shifted, but bullies don't disappear, they adapt, or they escalate. At 6:02 a.m., the familiar scraping started. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I reached for the phone and hit record. Through the new camera angle, I could see her head down, hoodie hiding most of her face, shoulders tense. But something had changed. She hesitated, one hand hovering over the bin. Her confidence wavered, subtle but noticeable. That hesitation was power I hadn't had before. I watched her circle the can, trying to gauge my reaction, but I didn't move. She tipped it slightly, enough to leave a bag sticking out, then froze. She looked straight at the camera, or maybe she thought it was empty, and for the first time, uncertainty flickered across her face. She backed away slowly, muttering something under her breath, then turned and walked toward the corner of the street. The motion alerts chimed, recording every second. By 7 a.m., messages started popping up from neighbors. Did you see her? She seemed off today. It wasn't gossip. It was observation. Documentation breeds awareness, and awareness changes behavior faster than confrontation. I realized the trap wasn't just my camera or the light, it was the visible pattern of accountability. Once behavior is exposed repeatedly, even someone bold enough to act like a dictator hesitates. Later that afternoon, the HOA president called again. We're reviewing the clips, he said, voice careful. Your approach is thorough. We'll be taking appropriate action. No reprimand for me. No warnings. Just acknowledgement that the issue was documented, undeniable, and repeatable. My patience had created a system she couldn't circumvent. I started thinking about the next steps. Escalation was tempting, exposure online, street-wide alerts, but I wanted it handled cleanly. No humiliation, just boundaries enforced. I drafted a notice to the board outlining the repeated incidents, the timestamps, and the new footage. Everything was factual, unemotional. Bullies hate facts, they survive in ambiguity. I was removing her comfort zone. By evening, the street felt quieter. Her usual patrols slowed. The tension lingered, but it was a different tension, one where I controlled the narrative. She wasn't gone, but she was cautious now, forced to operate in a space where her actions had consequences. I understood then, the real trap isn't cameras, motion alerts, or USB drives. It's the patient collection of truth, repeated until it can't be ignored. And yet, I knew the story wasn't finished. Behavior evolves, and people who feel challenged often push harder. I had leverage, yes, but I had to anticipate the next move before it happened. The following week was a careful dance. I left my trash can in its usual spot every morning, behaving as though nothing had happened. But every movement was calculated, every alert watched. I noticed subtle changes almost immediately: footsteps slower, glances over the shoulder, small hesitations. She was testing boundaries, seeing if the old patterns still worked. They didn't. And that nervous energy? It was fuel. At 6:04 a.m., she approached again. Hoodie up, hands in pockets, posture rigid. But instead of her usual deliberate tip, she paused mid-step, looked directly at my driveway, and then hesitated. She circled the bin slowly, nudging a bag lightly with the tip of her sneaker. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would justify a complaint but enough to signal she was testing me. I didn't flinch. I recorded every second, knowing this small hesitation was the seed of change. That afternoon, neighbors began talking more openly. "I saw her this morning," one said. "She seemed nervous." Another added, "I think she's realizing we're watching." Word spreads faster than confrontation, and suddenly, her authority wasn't invisible anymore. Bullies rely on invisibility, the assumption that no one is noticing. Exposure strips that away. Meanwhile, the HOA board started following up more seriously. Calls, emails, and finally, a formal warning was sent to her. They cited repeated disturbances and misuse of authority, directly referencing the evidence I had provided. No opinion, just facts. She received it, read it, and the reaction was immediate. Her usual smug smile was gone, in its place, a frown of frustration and disbelief. That night, I reviewed all footage again, noticing small details I'd missed: her foot dragging slightly as she left, the way she checked behind her as if expecting cameras. Every movement told a story, and patterns confirmed the truth. She had relied on fear and anonymity, both were gone now. I realized the power of quiet consistency. I hadn't shouted, yelled, or humiliated. I had simply recorded, repeated, and documented. The next morning, the street felt almost normal. Her patrol slowed further, cautious glances replacing brazen acts. Neighbors walked more confidently, exchanging nods and quiet smiles. My driveway stayed untouched, the trash can upright. For the first time, the balance of power had shifted without confrontation. But I knew this wasn't the end. Someone like her doesn't simply surrender, she adapts. I had to anticipate potential escalation, maybe passive-aggressive complaints, maybe a sudden change in tactics. Documentation alone wasn't enough, I needed foresight. My patience and evidence gave me leverage, but vigilance was still required. The real lesson had started to crystallize: power is not in aggression or control, it's in consistency, clarity, and accountability. Once the pattern is visible, even the most confident bully hesitates. And when they hesitate, behavior begins to change. By midweek, the dynamic had shifted in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. The street felt different, quieter, yet tense, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. I began noticing other subtle changes: cars parked slightly differently, dogs on leashes tugging owners along the sidewalks, and neighbors pausing to exchange knowing glances. The ripple effect of accountability was unfolding. At 6:05 a.m., she appeared again, but this time her approach was tentative. No hoodie this time, sleeves rolled down, hands slightly raised as if to show she meant no harm. She moved cautiously, scanning the surroundings. I knew she was testing the limits of the new boundaries I'd set. The camera captured every step: hesitation, glances, small adjustments to her footing. She nudged the trash bag once, lightly, then paused, caught herself, and walked away. No smirk. No confidence. Just careful observation, as if she didn't want to be caught on record again. Later that afternoon, the HOA president called with an unexpected tone. "We've received reports of changes in neighborhood behavior. People are noticing the difference," he said. "Your documentation is compelling. We may need to formalize new rules to prevent this type of harassment." It wasn't praise, it was acknowledgement. But it was more than that: it was proof that measured, consistent action can force systemic change. I realized my small intervention had evolved. What started as a personal stand against repeated annoyance was now a catalyst for broader awareness. Neighbors who had once shrugged off minor annoyances were now vigilant, noting patterns, documenting anomalies, and cautiously observing the Karen's behavior. Power, once concentrated in one person's unchecked hands, was diffused. That evening, I reviewed the clips again, frame by frame. Each subtle movement, each pause, each glance told the story of someone realizing their control was slipping. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction in embarrassment, only the calm certainty that fairness was being restored. My role wasn't to punish, but to ensure that repeated, targeted harassment could no longer operate in shadows. By week's end, the street had entered a new rhythm. Trash cans remained upright. Walks in the morning were relaxed. Casual greetings became common again. She still prowled, but every movement was measured, careful, and subdued. The knowledge that her actions were visible and consequences inevitable altered her behavior. I understood then that the real victory wasn't about confrontation or drama. It was about structure, persistence, and patience. By documenting, repeating, and letting the evidence speak, I had shifted the narrative. Bullying thrives in secrecy, transparency kills it. And once the street experienced that shift, the foundation for lasting change was laid. The following week, the change in atmosphere was undeniable. The street no longer carried the tension of fear, instead, it hummed with quiet observation. Neighbors greeted one another more openly, and even casual morning routines felt less like navigating a minefield. But I knew better than to assume the issue was fully resolved. Habits like hers don't vanish, they linger, adapt, or resurface. At 6:01 a.m., I spotted her from the kitchen window. Hoodie on again, but her movements were careful, deliberate, cautious. She approached the trash can, paused, glanced left, glanced right. Something had shifted in her demeanor. Gone was the confidence that had once made her seem untouchable. She nudged the bag lightly, then froze, sensing the camera's coverage. Then she stepped back, spun on her heel, and left without completing her usual act. Neighbors noticed, too. A few waved from their porches, sharing subtle smiles of acknowledgement. One called out, "Looks like she's thinking twice today." Even small acts of public awareness reinforced change. Bullies feed on invisibility, removing that invisibility forces them to recalibrate. That afternoon, the HOA board reached out for a follow-up. They requested all video footage, stills, and logs. Their tone was careful, formal, and respectful. "We want to prevent further incidents," the president said. "Your documentation will help guide us in enforcing fair, consistent rules." I uploaded the files, organized, time-stamped, and annotated. This wasn't just about one neighbor anymore, it was about establishing precedent and maintaining fairness across the community. By evening, I reflected on the lessons learned. Patience had become my strongest tool. I hadn't escalated emotionally or publicly shamed her. I simply observed, documented, and waited. Each repeated act, each hesitation, each smirk, or its absence became part of a narrative she could no longer control. She had been confident because no one questioned her actions, and I had shifted that power balance through persistence and careful planning. That night, I noticed something else, a subtle change in how neighbors interacted with her. Instead of ignoring her presence or avoiding confrontation, they now acknowledged it cautiously, maintaining awareness without antagonism. Accountability had spread, rippling beyond just my property. Patterns mattered, consequences mattered, and perception mattered. Before bed, I reviewed the week's recordings again. I watched her movements, the small hesitations, and the recalibration of her approach. She was learning, slowly and uncomfortably. And in that learning, there was an undeniable shift. Power is not about rules or threats, it's about visibility, consistency, and the certainty that your actions are being witnessed. This was the point where change solidified. And yet, the story wasn't over. Lessons are never complete until behavior fully transforms. The next few days would determine if the shift was permanent or if she would attempt a final, desperate push. The following mornings felt almost surreal. My driveway stayed untouched. Trash cans remained upright. Yet, I didn't let complacency creep in. Habits take time to break, and people who rely on control don't surrender overnight. I monitored every approach, every glance, and every hesitation. Even when nothing happened, observation remained crucial. Vigilance had become my silent ally. At 6:03 a.m., she appeared one last time for the week. Hoodie up, hands hovering near the can as if tempted to act, but she froze mid-step. I watched the footage later. She circled, scanned the street, nudged a bag lightly, then pulled her hands back. Her face showed frustration, uncertainty, and even something like respect, though she wouldn't admit it. She retreated, leaving the can untouched. The transformation was subtle but undeniable. The repetition of accountability had reshaped her behavior. Neighbors began to report small victories, no new complaints, no mysterious notes, and even a few sharing that their own minor irritations had been resolved peacefully. Awareness had a contagious effect. People noticed when someone's actions were scrutinized consistently. The balance of power on the street had shifted quietly, but it was permanent in essence. The bully had to adapt or fade. Later that afternoon, the HOA board finalized their review. Policies were updated to prevent unilateral enforcement of minor violations, and residents were encouraged to document incidents consistently. My role wasn't highlighted publicly, but the impact was evident: a more equitable system, fair rules, and a clear path to accountability. I had sparked a change that extended beyond my driveway. That evening, I reflected on what had transpired. The trap I set wasn't a booby trap, a prank, or retaliation. It was structure, patience, and documentation. It wasn't about humiliation or revenge. It was about creating undeniable evidence and letting behavior reveal itself over time. Bullies thrive when ambiguity shields their actions. Removing that ambiguity forces them to confront reality. I also realized the neighborhood dynamic had improved not because of confrontation, but because people felt empowered to act within reason. They no longer felt at the mercy of arbitrary enforcement or intimidation. Awareness, consistency, and measured response had cultivated both safety and respect. As night fell, I looked at the driveway, the trash can upright under the porch light. No motion alerts had triggered. For the first time in weeks, I felt calm. The tension that had defined mornings for months had lifted. Change, patience, and careful planning had succeeded where arguments, complaints, and frustration had failed. And yet, I knew the story wasn't fully over. Behavior can relapse, patterns can shift, and lessons need reinforcement. The final chapter wasn't about a single confrontation. It was about ensuring lasting balance. The last piece of the puzzle was understanding how to maintain it without returning to conflict. Morning came crisp and quiet. The street, once tense and wary, now held a subtle calm. I approached the driveway, glanced at the trash can upright, undisturbed, and smiled quietly. The Karen who had prowled like a shadow for weeks was still present, but her influence had diminished. The trap I had set wasn't about punishment. It was about restoring balance, proving that repeated, deliberate harassment could no longer operate in secrecy. At 6 a.m., I watched her from the window. Hoodie off this time, movements careful but restrained, hands folded, she approached the usual spot. She nudged a bag lightly, stopped, looked toward the house, and then walked away. No smirk, no swagger. The transformation was evident. Hesitation replaced confidence, and accountability had replaced anonymity. The street itself had shifted. Neighbors walked with ease, conversations resumed, and the unspoken rules of vigilance had settled. Behavior had changed without chaos or conflict, simply because it was observed consistently and documented thoroughly. By afternoon, the HOA finalized its measures. New policies clarified boundaries, documentation procedures, and enforcement limitations. Residents were encouraged to report violations consistently and factually. My footage had served as a blueprint, not just proof of misbehavior, but a lesson in how structured observation and patience could restore fairness. The balance of power had permanently shifted from arbitrary enforcement to transparent accountability. I reflected on the journey. I hadn't set out for confrontation or revenge. My goal had been simple: a peaceful, fair neighborhood where rules applied equally and harassment couldn't hide behind ambiguity. Each step, careful documentation, silent observation, and measured presentation had dismantled a pattern of abuse without escalating conflict. Power isn't derived from control, it's maintained through consistency and oversight. I had learned that patience, when paired with strategy, can be more effective than confrontation or anger. That evening, I checked my driveway one last time. The trash can stood as it should, the porch light illuminating its upright form. No alerts, no shadows, no tension. The Karen still existed, but she had adapted to a new reality where her actions were visible and accountable. And the neighborhood had adapted with her, smarter, more observant, and aware that vigilance was a community responsibility, not an individual burden. As I closed the window, I realized the lesson went beyond trash cans, HOA rules, or one difficult neighbor. It was about patience, persistence, and letting facts speak louder than theatrics. When behavior is documented carefully and repeated incidents are observed, the truth becomes undeniable. And once that truth is clear, even the boldest bully has no choice but to adjust or fade into irrelevance. Some battles aren't won with shouts, they're won with calm, meticulous attention. And that is how I restored balance to my street, one trash can at a time.
If you enjoyed the, don't forget to subscribe to Karen Universe, share with your friends and drop your thoughts in the comments.